U.S. debt exceeds 40 trillion for the first time in history. Like and subscribe.
We broke the record. We broke the record. $40 trillion debt.
Oh,
Yes.
oh yeah, that's so good. So much.
Exactly. The day we've been all waiting for.
Isn't that wonderful?
Where's my big foam finger with the number 1 on it?
The US is number 1. It's what's crazy though is that it doubled. It was $20 trillion when Trump first took office. It doubled since 2017. I remember everyone was just going crazy about it in 2017. Just fucking doubled.
Yeah. U.S. debt is reaching such levels that it's becoming more and more obvious to everyone. We're very close to a debt spiral where the interest cost just becomes unsustainable.
Doubled.
Yeah.
How insane is that?
It's pretty insane. You know, there's this thought experiment I've been doing for a long time to help people understand exponential growth, right? Because that's what we're seeing, like things that go like this. Yeah.
Yep.
And it goes like this because, you know, we're humans, so we think linearly, right? And we can do brilliant things linearly. Not me, but, you know, like professional baseball players, you throw a ball at 102 miles an hour and they can calculate and hit it. You know, it's astonishing. But even the best baseball player slips on the ice in the front of their house and we're all going down like a sack of taters because that's not linear. We go down as a square. So I did this. I came up with this thought experiment. It was like this.
All right.
Let's imagine we go to the biggest stadium you can imagine, like the biggest one you've ever been in. And it's watertight. And I handcuff you to the highest row of bleacher seats, right? And then I take a little magic eyedropper and I put a drop of water in your hand. And it's magic because it doubles every minute, right? So after 1 minute, you have 2 drops. And after 2 minutes, you have 4 drops. 5 minutes, you filled up a thimble. The question is, how long do you have to escape from your handcuffs?
I don't know. 45 minutes?
Would you think?
I'm not going to guess because I know the number is going to be insane. I've heard similar examples before, and the numbers are just difficult for our brain to even fathom.
Yeah, it's 50 minutes, right? Yankee Stadium would be completely filled in 50 minutes, right?
Pretty close.
It's insane.
But that's not the insane part. The insane part is at what time, and this is true for any stadium, at what time is it still 97% empty space?
You work backwards. 100%. Half of that. 50. 35, 12, 6, 3. 5 minutes.
Right. And how many people realize how serious the predicament is? And the answer is, for the first 45 minutes, it only fills up the first 3%.
That's insane.
And then it goes to 6, 12, 25, 50, and we're done, right? And it's gone. So we're on that exponential component right now. And like you said, it took all of American history to Trump 1 to get to 20 trillion, and now we're at 40.
That's
and then the
insane,
question is, you know, at what point are we slapping on $40 trillion every 5 years, and then every 1 year, and then every 6 months, and then every week, and then every... That's the nature of how these things progress like that. It's astonishing. So we're caught in an exponential trap right now. Things are going fast.
We're very near the point where just rampant money printing is the only way to finance the debt.
I hosted a great debate yesterday. Not sure if you saw it or at least saw it pop up between on the US dollar hegemony between George Gammon, which I'm sure you know, and Philip Pilkington, which has been gaining traction.
Yep, money printing is going to make gold explode. We're not near that money printing yet. Well, relatively, actually, we are pretty near it. We are like a few years away. That's, in the grand scheme of things, not that much.
Recently, since the show we did on the manipulation of the oil market. It's a fascinating conversation. I learned so much. When I do these debates, I'm learning. I spoke maybe 2% of the time. But another thing I've really been learning a lot about is the Japan situation. It's more messed up than I initially thought because so what the Japanese could do, so the yen is losing value, and for the Japanese to prop it up, you know, currencies are always bought and sold in pairs, usually with the dollar. 90% of currencies are with the dollar. So what the Japanese could do to prop up the yen is buy yen, sell dollars. And the way to do that is to get the dollars to sell by selling their treasuries, the US treasuries. They're the biggest holder of US treasuries. Now, I know the first reason why they can't do that is obviously the US doesn't want them to do that because that would lead to flooding the market.
Yeah, the Japanese own $4 to $5 trillion of U.S. debt stocks. They sold that and brought it back home. It would crash a lot of things here in the United States.
Market, increasing interest rates, and that was completely screw up the US economy, higher interest rate, paying the debt, which they spent on
Owning a gold mine would be an excellent thing right now.
where the Americans, you guys spend, the US spends more on its national debt than it does on defense. I know it's a common fact. People sometimes forget about it. The US spends more than any country in the world on defense by far, and it spends on its own debt servicing its debt more than it does on defense. And if Japan sells US treasuries, floods the market, interest rates go up, the US will pay more for that debt. But so that's the first reason why the Americans don't want the Japanese to do it. Now, one can argue is like if it gets desperate enough, the Japanese will eventually do it if they have no choice. Because the Americans have offered like a swap line type thing, a repo, I don't know what you call it, but to essentially allow the Japanese to stake their treasuries, to give it to the US Treasury, and the US prints money on, doesn't really print money, that sells euro reserves, and then gives that money to Japan. So essentially, instead of selling the treasuries, it's in a way indirectly selling them to the US.
Yep.
But there's another thing I learned as well, is that if Japan actually sells US treasuries to prop up the yen, but that
is the one failing of any reserve currency, even gold, is everyone buys it as a store for value. If everyone wants to get out at the same time, even gold would go down. And get U.S. Treasuries in this case. Like the Japan one, you get out. It has $1.1 trillion of U.S. Treasuries. Now, how can it liquidate that without crashing the Treasury market? It can't really. It's like someone who has a huge position in a stock. Well, if they start selling that position, by the time they get halfway through, the stock price will have tanked. Too big a position in anything, it's hard to get out.
That still wouldn't work, because when the interest rates go up in the US, then that margin difference between the US and Japanese interest rate.
One thing about Japanese debt is half of the debt is owned by a central bank, which is basically Japan owning its own debt. We are not that lucky in the United States. We as foreigners that and other investors that own most of our debt, so we don't own our debt. 48% of it by the Japanese central bank. That means if you only take the part that's owned by foreigners and, private sector, its debt to GDP is actually lower than ours. But it's still not in a good position. They still have a lot of debt.
Has widened, because the whole reason Japan's in this situation is because they have such low interest rates relative to other countries that everyone's borrowing yen, selling it, and investing in other countries like the US that have higher interest rates. And if the US interest rates go up because of the Japanese selling the US treasuries, then more people will go and borrow yen, sell the yen, which leads to more downward pressure on their currency, to then invest in the US, buy American dollars and invest in the US to kind of to make that arbitrage. So in other words, and the reason I bring this up is when you start to understand, you start peeling the onions, and this is one of many onions in today's financial system. When you start peeling those onions and understanding them, which is your area of expertise and definitely not mine, you just realize how screwed the global economy is, like how bad it actually is. Like it's at a level where I'm not a gold guy. I'm not a guy that likes to kind of park his money in safe havens. I'm more of a risk taker. I make money. I build new businesses. I love building businesses, etc.
You should just keep your money in gold between the building businesses. You always, before you set up a business, you need to park your money somewhere as you get everything set up. Well, don't park it in dollars. Park it in gold.
But for the first time ever, I'm like, holy shit. As I peeled these onions in the last 48 hours, why am I not listening to Chris and buying gold? I should probably start parking my money in gold. Not because it's going to go up in value. It's not the point. The point is it just doesn't go down in value. That's all I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I first invested in gold. Not invested. I parked my money in gold. And it's just it's a lump and it sits there. The gold I bought in 2001 has done nothing. But it has compounded at about 9.8% a year. And it's
9.8. a year. He's crazy. Gold was like $50, I think, back in 2001 or something. Now it's 4,500. He's made a lot of money off his gold.
By far gone up more than any other single thing I've sat on and held. Stocks, anything, except for certain investments that were like one-offs. But so it's a way to protect yourself from this currency debasement. Okay. So
One of your family members owns a gold mine and a plantation. Well, plantation's nice too, but gold mine, yes, that is a very nice thing to own right now. I would like to own a gold mine.
We're getting to the stage of this now, and I'm going to add one thing. You mentioned that, the Treasury Department helped Japan out by selling euros to buy the yen. That was what the Treasury did directly, but they also brokered a thing where Japan has a bunch of Treasury bills, bonds held in custody accounts, and instead of selling those, they went over to the Federal Reserve and they opened up what's called a FEMA swap line, and they've been taking those treasuries in and emitting credit dollars to Japan. So it's actually money printing. But it's a loan, right? Because, it's a collateralized loan, but the collateral in this case is U.S. Treasury bonds. So there is actual money being printed and being handed to Japan right now. Okay, just a slight wrinkle, but it's part of the story and it adds to this. And Japan has been fighting
just
this
in case it's not bad. Just in case it's not bad enough, Chris, there is money printing happening.
There is. I mean, the deal is, well, not technically, because, they're going to have to undo that loan at some point.
I used to keep track of the Fed's balance sheet monthly to see what was going on, because that's how you track what's being printed. The bigger Fed's balance sheet gets, that means more money it's printed. I haven't done that in a while.
But maybe not. If I'm Japan, I hedge my risk by not having to pay those loans back in dollars. I just wait until those bonds mature, in which case dollars come back for those, and then I just cancel the loan at that point. So all the other money is outstanding, and the U.S. government still has to cover up all that cash to pay off those bonds. So that's the world we're in right now. And Japan has this other thing that they're fighting, because as their yen weakens, because the carry trade carries on, they also were facing vastly higher fuel import costs, because 100% of their hydrocarbons, everything's been going on in Russia and the Iran war and all that. Japan is really having to, they're importing an enormous amount of inflation right now. So when
they're importing nearly all their oil, and with oil skyrocketing in price, they're, like you said, importing a huge amount of inflation.
Inflation happens, bonds hate inflation, right? If inflation's running at 6% and you have a bond that pays 5%, back in the 70s, they called that a certificate of confiscation, right? Yeah. So nobody wants them. And I think we're seeing long bonds sell off everywhere. France, Germany, United States, Japan, all over the place, because the United States, have kicked off with Israel an enormous round of inflation that's about to come.
It's all going to hit next year. You're going to have the prices move up because of extra fuel cost of diesel hitting all-time high this year. Then you're going to have the food hitting all-time highs next year, the raw costs of the commodities, wheat, corn, soybeans, and that's going to drive up inflation. And those two are going to combine to be very nasty next year.
Because of diesel and jet fuel costs and things like that. Forget the price of oil for a minute. I know you've been tracking that, right? So that's the world we're in. And Scott,
you said here, if you're interested in a third world country involved in rare earth materials, well, the problem is this was never the issue. Mining rare earths was never the issue. China never had a monopoly on that. They have a monopoly on refining them. No matter where you dig up the rare earths, you then put it on a ship, send it to China, they refine it, and then that's how you get your rare earths. It all gets sent to China for refining. And that's why they control 97% of it or something. Because they have a monopoly on the refining. And we outsource that refining to China very smartly. Because our leaders are idiots here in the United States sometimes.
Sen is fighting this like crazy right now. He's got so many fingers in the dike. I don't know what he's going to do next, but the yen intervention was a first, I think we've only done it something like that 4 times in 40 years, so pretty rare. And then, of course, he just did.
They're building refineries in the Philippines. Well, to catch up to China, to handle the bulk and the quantities that China refines, Estimates I was given was 5 to 10 years is how long it would take. So these refineries that they're building, I don't think they're going to be ready anytime soon. Yeah, from everyone I've talked to, it's impossible to instantly break China's monopoly in rare earths because it takes so long to set up and develop all that refining capacity.
Implemented this thing where they're going to double the amount of treasury buybacks of certain treasuries that are out in the open market. And so that's going up to about $10 billion a month. It's not necessarily the size of it, it's the fact that he even had to do it at all. That's kind of concerning.
Yeah, I have my own theories of this. I'll bring it up. Back in 2003, in a federal open markets committee meeting, the Fed meets once a month to discuss the economy and whether to raise or lower interest rates or whatever. Well, in one of these meetings, back in June 25th, 2003, they started discussing the idea of manipulating interest rates, long-term interest rates, by selling put options. In this way, long-term yields could be influenced. We could sell put options on long-term treasury securities at strike prices associated with desired long-term yields. So basically, going out secretly into the market and selling insurance in case treasuries go down. And if it's very cheap to protect yourself from treasuries going down, then people are a lot more willing to buy them. Or people that have them and then they suddenly become worried. Instead of selling their treasuries, they go out and then they buy a very cheap put on U.S. treasuries. Well, when the whole Iran war started, oil prices explode. People now worry about inflation. I think that Treasury, even then down here, when after the MOU and they orchestrated this, and Fed started buying back what I'm pretty sure they've sold, like a lot of put options on treasuries, I think they're still stuck in the position. I think that they sold so many that maybe they didn't have time to buy them all back. And that's why they're now going out at the market to buy long-term treasuries to keep the rates down so you don't have to pay out on all the puts they sold.
So that's a pretty scary loop because now, as you've just explained, as inflation goes up, the yields that investors would want to get from treasuries needs to also go up.
Basically, what I just showed is shenanigans going on in the market that people like Chris Matheson probably aren't aware of. I would love to show him this, have him read this Federal Reserve transcript. I think it would give him nightmares.
To make for that difference. Otherwise, they'd be losing money. If you make 5% yield from the treasuries, inflation hits 10%, you're losing money. So it just doesn't make sense to buy treasuries anymore. So the yield on treasuries needs to increase proportionally. And the country that has its finger on the pulse when it comes to inflation right now is Iran. So if they keep that blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, if they start striking the Gulf energy infrastructure, spike energy prices, which are already high. I was just going through a report today about the soaring diesel prices that have ripped across the U.S. economy and the impact it's having, and that we haven't seen the full impact yet, how it's going to trickle down the...
Yeah, all these fallouts from the Iran war, they take time to develop. Like, diesel prices only now hitting all-time highs. We have a lot of inflation in the pipeline.
The entire economy. So as we start seeing that, then inflation picks up in the US and around the world, and then we have yields have to catch up to that. And that's happening already. I'm seeing a report that's been making the rounds. Global bond markets have caught on fire. The most notable spike in long-term yields is happening for the US and France, but the point in the rise in long-term yields is truly a global phenomenon. Reckless fiscal policies catching up with governments, includes Australia.
It's a global phenomenon, but U.S. Kicked it off. U.S. long-term treasuries going up right when oil fell. Kicked it off. And also, higher oil prices affect bonds everywhere. Everyone knows that the big wave of inflation is coming, so, bond yields are heading up.
Australia, my country, Canada, Switzerland, France, Italy, the UK, Japan, Germany, and the US. And then as, interest rates go up, then those governments have to pay more to service their debt. And just to me, with my limited understanding, it just seems like a doom loop that's very difficult to get out of, unless I'm missing something. Because
We've been stuck in this doom loop in terms of U.S. debt for a long time, except we're getting nearer and nearer to the doom part of the loop.
if I'm not missing anything, it's a pretty scary scenario.
Well, we've been here before, but not at these levels of debt, and that's what makes it scary this time, right? So if your interest rates really start rising and you don't have an enormous structural deficit and huge outstanding debts, you've got some maneuvering room. So what you're saying is, which is right, we don't have as much maneuvering room as we used to, because even at current interest rates, we're seeing that interest expenses for the U.S. government's already its number one non-discretionary line item outside of Social Security, right? It's higher than defense, right? It's like running at about $1.45 trillion a year now. And that's just going to keep going up. And the more it goes up, the more they have to borrow. The more they borrow, the more the rates go up. The more the rates go up, the more the interest payments go up. And that's the doom loop, right? Ooh, you just keep going. But, Germany's facing 16-year high financing costs right now. France, same deal. But what's interesting, you know who's missing from that list? Who's going the opposite direction? It's China. Yep. Who's missing from that list? Who's going the opposite direction? It's China. Yep. They're 10-year.
Yeah, because investors are heading towards safety, and China is the safest of the fiat currencies. And it's not really fair to call it a fiat currency because they have a hell of a lot of gold backing their currency. It's just their currency isn't redeemable in gold, but it is backed by a lot of gold.
Your rates are dropping like really fast. And that could reflect a lot of disinflation going on in their market. Maybe they're having more trouble with their real estate market than I thought. I don't understand how they avoided it in the first place.
They have huge oil reserves, so to over 1 billion barrels of oil in reserves. So Strait of Hormuz, it needs to be closed 2 years to seriously affect the Chinese.
But they seem, on the appearances, they've been avoiding it. But maybe their bond market's saying not so much. But at least their financing costs are going the other direction.
Doesn't mean there's more trust in their treasuries as well?
It can.
One of the
might
things
be,
it can have impact.
Well, I mean, I'm not as familiar with exactly how China parses this stuff out, because what's the difference between the government and a state-owned enterprise? I'm not sure there's a lot of daylight there in terms of how the financially the machinery operates. But if you're worried, for instance, that the economy is really not doing well, and you at that point, you really don't want to hold corporate bonds. You really want to hold sovereign bonds, because no matter what, the government, can print and pay back its debts, right?
Yeah.
So often you see that flight to safety when economic trouble arises. But now you can see the other thing happening, which I think is happening now in the West.
That flight safety is for economic troubles, inflation troubles, like the Strait of Hormuz being closed. The government bonds aren't that safe anymore because inflation is the one risk to government bonds.
Which is we're watching rates rise because of actual trouble in the system at this point in time. And that's both fiscal difficulties and also now inflation, which is going to feed the fiscal difficulties. And so those things are really paired.
So the Iranis have been talking a lot about punishing the Americans. Even one of their commanders now, I was reading the quote earlier with Brandon Weichert when we did the daily news recap, and I was reading his quote where he's saying that we have to cause enough political harm as well as economic harm for the U.S. and for Trump to ensure that no one thinks about attacking us again.
That's what I've been saying since the beginning of the war. Iran holds Strait of Hormuz closed 6 months, and they've achieved real deterrence. So far, they haven't. It hasn't been 6 months yet. And there was the MOU, which is like half a month that the Strait of Hormuz wasn't closed. So they should still hold it closed a little bit longer to achieve full deterrence. But sometime in September, I think they will have achieved that.
It's something we've discussed before. It's not new for us and the audience that listen to this. But if you're going to take what he's saying there, and you also understand how astute the Iranians are when it comes to not only the American economy, but the politics of the American system, everything, the primaries, they watch it all. And we've seen that with the posts by Galibaf and all that, when they take a jab at Trump mentioning gas prices or take a jab at Bessent and respond in a very articulate way with economic equations, etc. If the Iranis are looking at all this, aren't they in a position where they say, shit, this is our opportunity? Because they know that bond yields around the world for the US and the rest of the world are spiking. They're like, this is our chance. This is our...
Yes, exactly. They held the Strait of Hormuz closed 5.5 months. They are so near the point where diesel prices start hitting all-time highs and people start panicking. They are so near that. Why stop now? Why negotiate when 1 month from now they're going to be in such a stronger position? It makes no sense, right? That's what the Iranians have realized. That's why right now he's the one going to be the least interested in negotiating. Just wait a month and everything will come together for them.
Our chance to cause the US and the world enough economic harm that to give us more leverage so we have bigger demands, because now they're desperate, not only because gas prices are up, not only because their munitions are depleted, because their entire system could collapse. And they'll never think about attacking us again.
Yeah.
And so...
And that's the problem with Mario is all the way up to now, he was like for the MOU, thinking it was good for Iran to do that. And I was like, well, the MOU is good, it is entirely in Iran's favor. If the United States actually lives up to it, it'd be good. Of course, the United States never lived up to any part of their side of the MOU. So it wasn't really a good thing for Iran. No, just hold the Strait of Hormuz closed. Don't give Trump the off-ramp that Mario keeps talking about. Trump needs a loss so that next president thinks, oh, should we attack Iran? Well, look what happened to Trump. No, I don't want that happening to me. No, so let's not attack Iran. That's called deterrence.
With that calculus, how much damage could the Iranians cause if they choose to?
Honestly, they could kick off something that would be indistinguishable from the Dark Ages if they chose to. And that would be, I'll call this
the Dark Ages. Yeah. This is, he's talking about if all the oil infrastructure in the Gulf is destroyed. And yes, it would be like twice as bad as the Great Depression. And that's pretty damn bad.
the nuclear option without using nukes. It would simply mean somewhat semi-permanently destroying the Gulf Coast oil infrastructure. Okay, you don't hit oil tanks. They're splashy. They make big smoky things, but they're very easily replaced. This time you go after the cracking towers, the coking towers, the sensitive machinery, the LNG trains, and things that take years to fix. And that's if you have a functioning economy that can actually deliver those things. If you take out enough of that, as we've talked about before, you're taking out about 25% of the world's total energy. That includes about 20% of oil, 5% LNG, and some products. And if you do that, you're going to set the world economy back 30, 40%, and
30, 40% of the world economy, poof, gone. Yeah, that's apocalyptically bad.
Every developed economy, the currency system involved goes poof. We just can't survive that level of...
Yeah, the dollar's finished, like, instantly. Like, I was saying my timetable for United States dollar collapsing is like 4 or 5 years now. This happens. Iran destroys all the oil infrastructure. 1 year becomes my timetable. Because, yeah, the entire world economy starts going up in smoke, evaporating. You're at 50% unemployment, stuff like that. Yeah, very, very bad. And if GDP drops by half, if U.S. GDP dropped by half, debt doesn't go down. So the only way U.S. can service that is printing money.
Rearward action in the story. And if it breaks hard enough, long enough, you know, it takes almost forever to get yourself back on track, if you even can. You know, there's a certain level of complexity that takes a lot of energy to get to. And if you take the energy away, it's unclear if you're going to actually build back to that same level again. And that's what's...
Russia would be fine. The rest of the world would implode. But Russia, it has everything it needs. It has the oil it needs. It would survive it. The entire world, it would give the world to Russia, basically. Even China would be then horribly dependent on Russia, because Russia also has oil that it can drill into in the Arctic. It could, if that was accelerated, Russia would be in the best position in its history if this happened. And yeah, it would change the balance of power between China and Russia to in Russia's favor, because Russia would hold all the cards in terms of oil.
Actually potential here. So we're going to hope that's way off the table. We really don't want to go down that path. But remember, you and I have talked about this before. What Trump is doing, and I'll hold Trump as a placeholder because I'm not entirely sure he's completely driving the show. But what he is doing...
Yes, from everything I hear, he is in a bubble. That his advisors are afraid to tell him things, facts, inconvenient facts. It's facts that'll make him angry. And so he's not being told a lot of things. Like he did not know the U.S. base in Bahrain had been destroyed. and that's why the U.S. aircraft carrier region couldn't be restocked efficiently, and that's why the situation was so bad on the USS Lincoln. But he didn't know about the destruction of the base in Bahrain, so he didn't know about the bad conditions on the USS Lincoln. He just was not informed. Isn't that terrifying in a way? We have a U.S. president that's in the bubble, and he might not always be lying. Like, the words he's saying when his speeches are obviously not true, but he might believe them to be the truth. That's the scariest part.
It seems almost perfectly designed to just keep the strait closed as long as possible. I'm sure you saw Lavrov came out and officially complained to Washington.
That's what it may look like, the U.S. strategy. But it's really much, much simpler than that. What's happened in the Middle East is fundamentally very simple. Trump was tricked into going into this Iran war. First thing that tricked him is the myth of U.S. superpower militarily that can defeat anyone. That he watches 3 hours of Fox News a day, and there, U.S. is portrayed as invincible. So what danger is there to attacking Iran? I mean, there's no way the United States could lose, right? So that was number one. Number two, of course, is Netanyahu, who gave him bad intel and said that Iran would collapse in 3 days. So you had Trump thinking there's no risk in attacking Iran and possibly huge reward. They could do what he did to Venezuela and take 32% of Iran's oil by bombing the supreme leader. That's the vision that was pitched to him. It's not what happened. So that's how we got into the war. And everything since then is Trump not wanting to recognize reality, that he just lost against Iran, that he started a stupid war that the United States had no way of winning, and he wants Iran to surrender to him. Iran's not going to do that when they won the war. So that's the impasse. We're at that impasse. Trump wants to pretend he's won, and Iran know it's won. And until the litmus test for when this war is over, just look, Trump will stop talking about winning the war, having won against Iran. Once that happens, then we're near the end of the war, because he's finally starting to recognize reality.
Hey, you're providing targeting information to the Ukrainians to hit our things, our wild berries and our refineries and all that. And so these sort of pokes are clearly designed at this point in time to keep the energy crisis going. And you and I haven't talked about it a lot, but
he's just pretending he has the strait closed. The United States military has the strait closed. Yeah, we're not stopping a lot of their ships. We don't have enough ships in the region, or enough resources. We are occasionally doing something, forcing some ships to turn back, but we are making life a little bit unpleasant for Iranians. But overall, this is the state of the Strait of Hormuz. Just look at the orange line. A little bit went up during the MOU, but back down to nearly nothing, where it should be. All the way up here.
Food crisis for next year that's lurking right under the surface of that.
Can you expand on that? How bad is the food crisis?
Oh, yeah. The reason I don't harp on the food crisis is I've learned from experience that it's a year later. When you start seeing trouble in the food sector, at the beginning of the harvest, like not enough fertilizer, it takes a year from there for food prices to start going up, because food is harvested in the fall. Then it's shorted. It's early 2027 that food prices will really start to spike. Before then, long before then, we'll be dealing with the crisis in the oil market.
We don't know yet, but I just put out a report on this today, and so pretty fresh in my mind. We were missing about 40%, 40% of fertilizer, depending on which one we're talking about. Nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers are the two biggies. The nitrogen, because mostly it's because Qatar's offline, and because they're not having the natural gas, which is used to harvest nitrogen from the atmosphere.
Yep.
Tuck some hydrogens on from the natural gas.
And this Iran war started at the worst possible time, right before the spring planting season, right when the fertilizer should have been shipped out of the Gulf of Hormuz around the world, so that farmers could use it for their spring crops. And now it's gotten to the point with Strait of Hormuz being closed this long that now it's affecting the southern hemisphere. They plant during the fall. Well, there's still a huge fertilizer shortfall. So planting season in South America is going to be completely messed up by this fertilizer shortage too.
And that's ammonia fertilizer. And then the phosphate fertilizer, because you need sulfur. You need the sulfur from the refining process. You need about 50% of world sulfur that was exported came out of the Gulf. And yeah, there's a lot made domestic.
Of sulfur last time, 2 episodes ago. Remember how we saw the graph?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
50% of the sulfur that's exported came from the Gulf. Huge! 50% of sulfur market. If you were an importer of sulfur, went offline. That's, oh my God, what a disaster. I wonder if farmlands will go more cheaply due to some being forced to sell. Well, if you want to buy farmland for cheap, my best guess is, if you figure out how to do it, is Ukraine, because the farmers are especially screwed because they're now harvesting their crops and there's no way to store it, there's nowhere to export it. And some of them aren't even bothering spending the fuel to harvest their crops because they've nowhere for it to go. So you're going to have a lot of farmers there that are destitute. Of course, it's not exactly the safest place to invest, Ukraine right now, so that's a little issue.
Waterborne shipments of sulfur have cratered to almost zero here in August. So the United States, we make sulfur as a byproduct of our...
Oh, and in terms of the food crisis next year, what's going on? Odessa being blocked off, one of the biggest grain exporters, Ukraine not being able to export its grain. Yeah, that's going to make everything X times worse.
Fine, Canada does. Certain countries do, but there's a lot of countries that don't, that were almost entirely dependent on import, and they're SOL on this at this point. Okay. So, A, we don't have a lot of fertilizer going into the system, but B, it's now confirmed that this El Nino that's standing up is not just big, but it looks like it's going to be the biggest.
Oh, and of course, just because, fate wants to fuck with us, we have an El Nino, and that's going to affect crops negatively too. Just to add a little fuel to the fire in terms of food prices. This is going to be worse than I wrote about the 2010 food crisis. That was pretty bad. Wheat went from $2.50 to $9 during that thing. And this is going to be worse than that.
On record, possibly bigger than 1877. And that's going to completely bollocks up, as it always does, but this one being so huge, our normal rainfall patterns in particular across certain very, very key agricultural regions. So if we had wise leaders, they would go, okay, look, we have all this stuff going on. We don't like Russia. We don't like Iran. But with the El Nino coming, we should be doing everything we can to...
You don't mess around with Mother Nature. Rule number one.
No, you'd say, oh...
Yeah, if they stop the long-range strikes, all long-range strikes into Russia, Russia might allow Odessa to export its grain, allow Ukraine through Odessa to export its grain. But yeah, there's no way the warmongers in Europe would do that.
Oh, this is coming, so we should be as prepared as we can, and we're coming in probably as unprepared as we can. It's really kind of astonishing to see this unfold.
I saw it unfold back in 2010, where USDA entire media apparatus was convincing everyone, we had a record harvest, food prices are going to stay low forever. And it was all lies, and then prices exploded to the moon afterwards.
I know you have kids because you mentioned it on the show live. And you know how sometimes for people that have kids that are listening, you have your kid come to you and say something that, like, you're listening to this, you're listening to reports about Trump talking about nukes, you understand how the world's on the verge of collapse, a system that has existed for the last few decades, that have allowed the world to become what it is today, is on the brink. We're talking about a war that Trump can't get out of, all these different things.
Within the next 10 years, for absolutely certain, the US dollar will no longer be the reserve currency. It will be in free fall. You've seen all the signs. This Iran war guarantees it. And fallout from that. Financial crisis that'll hit next year because of it. And just 40 trillion national debt. That just grows faster and faster.
And then your kid's like, oh, do you like my new painting? Or I was at school and I had this kid bullying me. Okay, they live in their own world. The reason I'm mentioning this, Mike Huckabee just now, the Iranian...
It took 10 years for the U.S. national debt to go from 20 trillion to 40 trillion. But like Chris mentioned earlier, it's exponential growth. It's going to take less than 5 years for this to double again. And at that point, yeah, we'll be in the money printing phase.
Have been kicked in the butt twice. You would think that after that, they might begin to learn that Trump is serious when it comes to taking military action when he thinks it's the only option. That popped up, and then he keeps talking. He's in an interview now with Al Jazeera or Al Arabiya. And so when I saw this pop up on my screen, I kind of ignored it. But I'm like, while you're speaking, I'm focusing on what you're saying and the El Niño and the food crisis that we're facing on top of the energy crisis that we're facing. And then you have Mike Huckabee, the Israeli ambassador to Israel, talking about, like in his own little bubble, talking about how we kicked their ass. It's just crazy how disconnected they are. And
so many different bubbles in the world today in terms of information. Of course, the left bubble, but you have the bubble on the right, like Asmongold crowd bubble, who aren't aware of so many things regarding the Middle East. And Asmongold doesn't know about the ammunition shortage in the U.S. military, about the destroyed U.S. bases, about Iran basically controlling Strait of Hormuz, and there's jack shit the U.S. can do about it. That type of shit. So many bubbles.
And I feel like the Americans, and this is ongoing, this is one of many examples, like you listen to the US president and you get that sense. And it just starts to feel like the system is so screwed that there is no way out.
At one point, 15 years ago, during the financial crisis, I became convinced that the dollar was going to collapse in very short order, like a long time ago. At that point, I wasn't, on the conspiracy train, the market manipulations train. I thought that markets were honest and fair. I learned a lot since then. So, much better understanding how the world works. Now I'm much more convinced. My prediction next 5 years is where 4 to 5 years, dollar starts going into tailspin. Much more confident about that this time around.
Unless you get a president and you get Congress where they suddenly flip and their incentives are aligned again with the health of the U.S. economy, unless somehow that...
Yeah. Nearly every market is manipulated if there's a possibility to do so, because, yeah, the one manipulating it is going to get filthy rich.
Happens the way it is right now, with each member of Congress trying to please Israel, trying to please the military-industrial complex, trying to get votes by promising things they can't deliver or pay for, trying to please the Europeans and the Ukrainians, all these different things that have nothing to do with the actual issues that matter. As long as the incentives are skewed that way,
Yeah. On small scale, it's easy to turn 2 pennies into $30. It gets harder and harder the more money you go up. Like $30 into 1,000, that's harder. 1,000 into 10,000 gets harder still because people start noticing. Like the big corrupt players, they don't care if someone turns 2 pennies into $30. But if you start turning bigger quantities of money into higher quantities of money, they say, hey, we want that. And it becomes more difficult. Yeah.
And more people I speak to, including both sides of the aisle, like the debate I had yesterday, I'm buying gold. I'm buying gold, or maybe Chinese yuan. I don't know. Even though I don't trust the Chinese yuan or the Chinese economy, but it's just looking in a very disheartening way, looking so bad, so bad. It's crazy.
I know. I've got a whole long sort of podcast series that I've been producing, and it's not released yet, but it's coming out. And it's asking this question, like, is it too late? What can we do at this point in time? Can this be solved at the ballot box, right? I think it's a legit question, right? And if not, then what? How does it get solved? And there's 2 ways humans change, and I don't want to elevate myself above humans. I'm a human. This is true for everybody. You can either change through pain or insight. Now, pain's the most preferred.
Insight is impossible in today's world with today's media. If the media was like Mario or the channels I watch that discuss reality, then maybe it would be possible for the world to learn through insight. But today, mainstream media exists more to deceive than to inform. And so growth through insight is not really possible.
Bird root, most of us, you wait until something really bad happens with your health before you take it seriously, a breakdown in your relationship before you take that seriously, whatever it is. Pain's a pretty common way. We touch the stove, right? Insight is somebody important who you trust says, don't touch the stove. And you say, okay, it's good. I'm good. I can do that all on my own. But really, it's just how we're built. I'm kind of hoping, and I think the same spirit of optimism why you're doing what you're doing, I'm going to guess, is because we're hopeful, we're optimistic, we're hoping that if we can elevate the conversation, maybe we can have the conversation and change that way. I'm a little worried that the United States,
No. It's not possible because behind the scenes, there's some batshit stuff going on. You have the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, dealing in derivatives to manipulate long-term interest rates. And, that's the point we've gotten to. There's no fixing that easily. A lot more is wrong behind the scenes that people are aware of, even people like Chris Martenson. And so, there's no fixing it at this point.
has not experienced real pain in a very long time. Even World War II happened over there. Sure, boxes of soldiers came home, but I mean, in terms of like really experiencing the destruction of war, it hasn't happened here. The Iraq War.
The fact that there's so people care about pronouns in America is the biggest proof that America are a bunch of pansies these days. I mean, really, there are so many. The debasement of your currency, the destruction of your economy. Those are things you should care about.
Or nothing really happened, honestly, to people's lives over here who weren't involved in the military, et cetera, and so forth. And so this Iran war, though, is the first one where, hey, there's a little something came home, right? Diesel is now $5.50 nationally. I think it's going to be $5.75 by this time, a couple days, based on the wholesale pricing that happened today. So, and eventually people are going to go, okay, that's a little painful, you know, and I don't, is too much pain at the pump, $7 diesel, 8, 10, 15, but at least it's coming home a little bit. You know, we'll see how that plays out.
Doesn't impact people as quickly as gas. Gas, everyone puts it in the car. Diesel, that's only trucks, and that it takes more time for that to hit groceries and everything else. But it will. It's pent up inflation. There will be the pain. It just takes longer to hit.
But what you and I have been talking about, and which I think a lot of your guests have been talking about, is that the potential here is to really kind of wreck something that probably ought not to be wrecked. I like my economy the way it is. It's not perfect right now, but I much prefer it like this than completely destroyed or half destroyed.
Agreed.
Or with 50% unemployment or whatever the numbers might be.
Unfortunately, we have a corrupt cabal of criminals that are running our financial markets. And rather than ever going to jail, they'd rather let everything burn.
If we get into a true energy shortage, and that's what's at risk here. And to the spirit of your point, nobody in Congress is talking about this. Nobody who's our supposed leaders are actually having a legitimate, context-rich debate about any of this.
No, instead they're talking about Israel's right to exist. Unfortunately, and it reminds me of a conversation I had with Anna Kasparian yesterday. Got pretty emotional. She got teary at the end because we started talking. We were looking at the videos coming out of Israel. It was heartbreaking. It was just these homes getting bulldozed. It was just sad to see. But I was a lot less hopeful. I think she brought up God and why she's starting to look at, spirituality, religion, whatever you want to call it. And she asked me about how I look at this. I said, for me, it's having the opposite effect. As I see those things.
Well, it's a hands-off God. I'm willing to accept the principle that there's a higher being that set up the universe, and then in a way that would inevitably create life. And so there could be a higher being that intervenes in everyday life on Earth. I think that's less likely from what I've seen, especially, yes, from our perspectives, all these horrible things, children suffering. Yeah, I don't think there's a God causing that.
I don't want to say I'm giving up on humanity or the world, but I'm definitely not. For me, I'm in the mindset of like, if God exists, there wouldn't be these atrocities. Kids wouldn't be carrying out, wouldn't be rolled.
No, I'm just saying God could exist. He set everything up, and everything that happens, he good and bad, he allows it, and maybe then he's there at death and judges you then. Just doesn't interfere in life. That's possible. No evidence against it.
Playing in Gaza, carrying stretchers with their doll on the stretcher because that's what they're used to. But to link it to what you're saying, you talked about how the pain hasn't come to the US, so the US hasn't really felt it. They haven't felt it enough to learn to change. And you gave a great example of the best way to change is through insight or through pain. Insight, you learn from someone you trust. or pain, figure on the stove. In terms of learning from people you trust, I feel those have been hijacked. How can Fishback, I've had him on the show, but is it James Fishback?
Fishback,
I'm not sure if I'm Fishback, yeah. I've had him on the show. I'm like, this guy is so astute. And all the podcasters are talking about him. Joe Rogan talked about him, promoted him. All these different guys I listened to, Candace Tucker, I think, promoted him. I don't know about Tucker, but all these big voices. And then he barely gets anything in the polls. He got pretty good numbers with under 35s, but single digits with above 35-year-olds or above 55-year-olds.
That's the mainstream media for you. They still have a pretty firm grasp on a good chunk of the population.
Whatever it is. So when I see something like this, that I saw this today, and then as you were speaking, if you look at 9/11, I would use that as an example where pain did come to the mainland. The US felt the pain. I actually saw a video about it.
Damn it. These are going to be two people discussing 9/11, and I bet you neither of them could tell you the true number of skyscrapers that collapsed that day.
I was watching it this morning about how there's a Netflix series I was watching the trailer for, about how that really changed everything about it. I'm going to use the word everything loosely, but everything about the United States.
He is right there. Yes, 9/11 had a deep impact on America.
Where is that the US? Like, how much pain would the US need to feel? And the problem is when that pain starts to hit, wouldn't it be too late when you're talking about $100 trillion debt? And
yeah, I call the U.S. financial system and the U.S. dollar a Ponzi scheme, in that, like a Ponzi scheme, if you become aware of it, like Bernie Madoff ran a Ponzi scheme in 2008, they collapsed then. But if you found out about it a few months ahead of time, there's no way to fix it. There's no way to make the investors whole that have put their money into this thing where there's nothing now. It's not the type of thing that can be fixed.
Interest double the defense budget, just making up numbers here, because it's already bad enough. It doesn't need to get that bad for the economy to collapse. Wouldn't it be too late? Wouldn't countries be dumping treasuries, looking for an alternative? So that's the worry that I have, that if this is not enough pain, and if the 9/11 pain led to these forever wars instead of leading to something else, like 9/11 happened, the terrorists wrote as the one.
No, what's going to happen is the dollar's going to collapse. And before that happens, a necessary step before the dollar collapses is that faith in mainstream media will be shattered to nothing. Like, you think it's bad today, like a lot of people distrust it. I'm thinking about 99% of people thinking that CNN and Fox News are complete bullshit, because the news agencies, CNN, Fox News, right up until the bitter end will be cheerleading for the dollar and telling people, don't sell your dollars. Don't worry. The dollar won't lose value. It's the strongest in the world, etc. And anyone who listens to that is going to get completely screwed. And so everyone believing in the system. Once all faith in mainstream media the alternative media is going to take over in terms of informing people. They're going to learn a lot of things that are going to make a lot of people very angry. And you're going to have a reckoning at that point. That's what the people at the Treasury and in Deep State are trying desperately to avoid. But they're sliding to, and there's no way to stop it. Sliding towards it, and there's no way to stop it.
One of the reasons is America's support for Israel, America's intervention in the region. That's what they wrote. I think Osama bin Laden himself said it, but that's what the organizers have written. If they wrote this is the reason, and you read it, but instead of looking at the reason saying, okay, we need to stop this, you listen to the news that skew it into they're fighting against your freedom, they're fighting against liberty, they don't like the American way of life, and then you double down on the exact reason that they warned about. I start to worry that when pain hits, the response is not, because of how skewed the media is and the messaging is, the response is not what it should be. That's the concern that I have.
Well, it's a fair concern. You and I should have a longer talk about 9/11 sometime.
Maybe he is someone who knows about the third skyscraper.
Because the official story is the conspiracy theory. It just doesn't hold water physically. It has a physics problem, and
Oh, good. Yes. Good. Especially when... Yes, in terms of physics. Don't talk to any architect or engineer about 9/11, because in terms of physics, the official story makes no sense whatsoever.
But me, I'm a science guy. I'm like,
yeah.
If you can't ask me to give up my physics.
He knows.
So it has a lot of problems in the story. It's totally an
He knows, he knows, he knows.
Complete story. So leave that aside for a second. But it was kind of painful, but then the pain was sort of misapplied. It wasn't, hey, I think that was a touch that, let's take it at face value. It was terrorists with box cutters from countries that hate us. Well, why do they hate us? Well, probably because we've been blowing them up for a long time and interfering with their lives.
Yep.
And,
We've been propping up an undemocratic regime in Saudi Arabia, and part of the Saudi royalty justifying their rule is promoting this radical version of Islam that says, don't question your Muslim leaders. Instead, fight the infidels. And he funded schools across the Middle East teaching this radical Islam. That, don't go after the Saudi royal family, just go attack, the Westerners. That's one dynamic towards the whole radical Islam problem in the Middle East.
Making them hate us, because the learning from that, the lesson, because we touched the stove, again, taking the official story at face value, which I don't. But if you did, you'd say, oh, well, maybe we should dial back our foreign interventionism, if that's the blowback, right? You could take that lesson. We didn't. We said, let's double down on the foreign intervention and, keep it going. And I'm not aware of any significant terrorist activity on our soil since then, despite, attacking Iraq over WMDs that didn't exist, despite what happened in Libya, despite what we did to Syria, despite, right? There's a lot of activities happened since then. So I'm not sure that we can really draw much from that in terms of cause and effect, that makes sense. But when I say pain, I mean, when your currency system breaks down, that's when your entire culture and society breaks down.
Yes. The big famous case, Germany, the Weimar Republic, where the mark went to the moon in terms of losing value. It became worthless. They used their currency as toilet paper. And what did you get a few years later? You got Hitler. Currency collapse, very radicalizing event.
And nothing happens, commerce collapses, business collapses, jobs are lost, because it's kind of we have a faith-based currency system. It's called debt-based money. We all have faith in it, and so it continues to operate, right? And if we all lose faith in it, then we might as well be living in Zimbabwe in the 90s and Yugoslavia in the 80s or any other place where the currency system is collapsed. And when it does, it's
everywhere throughout the history of the world, every fiat currency has always collapsed. The dollar will not be the exception.
Never a good thing. It's a very bad thing, because the whole of society then kind of shreds until you can sort of put the pieces back together and redevelop a new system of money. And the concern I have, Mario, is that all these data centers and flock cameras and all this stuff that's just getting shoved in, down the pipe so fast, those are just sort of a race to try and get a system in place in time.
Yes.
To be able to manage.
Yes. This used to terrify me. Like the IRS ordering 100 million bullets. Why does the IRS need 100 million bullets? Etc. But Trump got elected, and that completely threw a wrench in all their plans. And they might be trying to set something up for the day the dollar collapses. It won't work. It won't work.
The fall of the dollar or the financial system, if or when that happens. And that makes sense, right? Obviously, if you're in charge of 340 million people and you know that there's a chance that the system could be unstable, you would want to make sure you had control of that.
Exactly. That's why they had millions of bullets for the IRS. But then Trump got elected, and he threw a complete wrench in everything. And they're not prepared at all now.
I guess it's one way to look at it.
Yeah. I haven't looked at those flock cameras. Isn't that those? Is it traffic cameras where people are vandalizing them?
Yeah, we watched a video on it the other day. It's those cameras that set up all across the United States. They track your license plate, but also your digital signature. If you have a smartwatch and a phone, just by having that combination together, they can identify you, even if you take a different car, and track you. It's very Orwellian system that's being set up, and today, not that much use for it, but there's currency collapse and they try to transition to a more Orwellian form of government outright, it could come into play.
Is that what the flock cameras issue is? Or?
Yeah, they're technically, I guess they're ALPRs, automatic license plate readers, ALPRs, but they've got more stuff on them now. They're doing facial recognition. The Axon cameras which are a sub-breed, different company, also have Bluetooth readers on them. So they're scanning and reading possibly everything.
Yep.
But yes, they're keeping a full database of every time you drive your car and it goes past a flock camera, you're in a database all of a sudden. So if somebody wanted to recreate your movements for the past 30 days, in most municipalities and cities now, they can recreate it to a T.
Jesus. My trainer, who's also Australian, he told me in Australia, New South Wales, one of the states, they now could, there's a software, it's an Israeli company that has a software that allows law enforcement to hack into any phone. You probably know the name of the software. It's people are talking about it a lot now. And they've just passed a law in Australia that allows the police to use that software.
Not all phone systems are the same. So this software must be designed for like iPhone or Androids. Or there isn't one software that can hack every different type of phone. So I wonder which software this phone hacks. Probably the Apple.
Whenever they see there's cause for concern or whatever legal term they use, they don't need to get a warrant or anything. So that means they see someone and he messaged a police officer to ask that police officer, like, hey, have you used it? Is that true? And the police officer's like, yeah, it's true. I've been trained to use it. And I've used it on 2 or 3 people so far that I thought could be drug offenders. That's hacking to their phone and being able to see whatever they want using that software.
And I'm sure there's responsible cops that only use it like 2 or 3 times against drug traffickers. Then there are the cops that use it on every woman they date, or they don't like that guy, he cut me off, I'll look up his stuff, now leak it online. There's gotta be like a huge number of abusers there in Australia using this system. Because that's what happens everywhere, every time the government gets this type of power.
So which kind of links to your point where if we are heading down that path, which will lead to a breakdown of society, there's obviously elites out there that are looking at all this and saying, we need to be prepared for this. Because we got.
It's funny, I was worried about this type of stuff 10, 15 years ago. Now, a lot of other people are worried about it and seeing, we're this close to a currency collapse. Yeah, this governments are preparing for it. Flock cameras, that's probably part of it. And they're seeing the pattern.
Can't have the entire society break down. And in their mind, they're the ones that can allow society to operate. They're the ones pulling the strings. And the worry would be they look at all this and like, all right, we need to have more control of things. We can't, have riots on the streets and breakdown of everything that we're building.
That's not what they're worried about, Mario. They're worrying about people with pitchforks coming to their house and crucifying them for all the crimes they committed. And again, since you're not on the same page as Chris knows the truth about 9/11. And for example, the people behind 9/11 never want to be held to account for that. And that's what they're scared of. And that's what the flock cameras are for.
And an easy way to achieve this is control the narrative. And we're seeing that with social media.
No, for the dollars to collapse, dollar faith is a huge part of what keeps the dollar up. Yes, there is a real side to it. Like what? It's both faith and the amount of dollars in circulation affects inflation, and people's belief about the dollar affects inflation. And for the dollar to go into a death spiral, but faith in the dollar needs to be destroyed. The mainstream media is wedded to the dollar. They will defend the dollar and say it's safe and good store of value right up until the bitter end. And so faith in mainstream media and the dollar will go away at the same time. And that means that people will start learning the truth about what's actually been going on. Like truth about 9/11, for example, about the same time as the dollar collapses. And just watch some Asmongold streams and how he reacts to finding out about all the corruption in the world and how angry he is, and to give you a preview of what's going to happen when the broad population learns the truth. There's going to be a reckoning, and the people in power right now are terrified of that.
Control that with AI as well. And then
that's why they're building in all these bunkers to go hide out in.
With robotics.
Some of them would rather have a thermonuclear war than face an angry public.
With the surveillance state, it just makes it very hard to rise up against that system. And, out of all places, we're talking about China and how China's doing so well. China's another level. China, they've just accepted, they've just folded, and they've just lived in that world that we would consider unthinkable. We watch in movies. That has become a reality for them. So when we look at China as a non-interventionist state that's not, causing all these wars, intervening in other.
You bring up a good point, Proton Snail, about deflation. Let me tell you, I have them. I can look them up. The first articles warning about the dangers of deflation and in the mainstream media was about the 1970s, I think. Like late 1960s, they started warning the American public about the horrible dangers of inflation. The dollar's lost 99% of its value since then. Oh, you should be worried about deflation. No, not when you have a print happy Fed like we do now. The danger of deflation is non-existence. All along, from like late 1960s all the way till today, you can search and find articles, exactly the same articles, just worry about deflation. Oh, deflation could hit the U.S. economy. Oh no, the dollar might go up magically in value. No, spoiler, dollar never goes up magically in value. Inflation's one way. The dollar is on a one-way trip to hell. There will be no deflation.
The countries, true, but the world they've built, if you're someone in the West watching this and believe in your freedom, the world they've built is not a world that we would be okay with. But to be fair, Europe, Australia, etc., are not too far behind. They're catching up pretty quickly. They're like, holy shit, China was able to do it. And it is an advantage because it makes things more efficient. You know, I can't remember who I was talking to, and it has the upper hand because they don't have to worry about, you know, voters and democracy and all that. They can just get things done they think need to be done. And a lot of
United States used to be like that. The problem is, United States has been nerfed since 1934 when this bloody conspiracy started. This cabal of people that have been wrecking the dollar with their shenanigans and then manipulating everything to try to avoid ever paying for their crimes. Without that nerf, the United States used to do long-term planning. In fact, we planned like the Iraq War, we planned for that for a year and a half before doing it. We used to be planners, like the Chinese. The Iran War shows that we've gotten to the point where there's no planning whatsoever. That's another just point on the graft, as Asmongold would say, that we're nearing the end of the U.S. empire, is that we don't do any planning anymore.
countries in the West be like, we're falling behind. We need to do this as well. And the way to achieve it is having more control. Because democracy has inefficiencies, necessary inefficiencies.
Democracy, I don't even know if you can truly judge democracy in this current world, because we don't really have democracy. We have a corrupt cabal above. We have a corrupt mainstream media that exists to disinform the public. If you have the public that isn't correctly informed and they're not voting right, that isn't democracy. Is it possible to have a functioning media? We'll find out after the dollar collapses. And if it is possible, then maybe democracy can thrive at that point. But if it's that's the big vulnerability of democracy, is that it absolutely needs a free and honest media to function correctly. And we haven't had that in a very, 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 very long time.
If we have democracy.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's on the same page as me. We used to have, a long time ago, 100 years ago, the United States, we became the superpower of the world through democracy. Of course, it got hijacked, like I said, back in 1934, the Gold Reserve Act that created the wonderful Exchange Stabilization Fund. And from that little vehicle, all the rot emerged.
Exactly.
Well, so and I want to be careful comparing those two systems, because I actually think China's surveillance architecture actually works because their government is fully in control, and actually their government is stocked up with people who are there because they are highly competent at what they do, right? And so government at the top, corporations are subservient to the...
It used to work that way in the United States, too. My great-grandfather became Secretary of Treasury because he was very good at what he was doing. And he went from farm boy to news reporter to Undersecretary of Treasury to head of Citibank. That's back when the United States functioned correctly. And anyone could make it.
The government in this example in China, right? So if Jack Ma gets out of line, he disappears for 3 months and comes out with a new and improved attitude about the government, right? You know, and we don't do that. The United States has corporations at the top. They clearly have all the politicians in their pocket. So we have a corporate at the top. They have more power. I would submit to you, Larry Fink has more power than any senator or any congressperson at this stage, right?
Yeah.
For instance. And so if you take that model, though, and then you put a surveillance architecture into that, the only thing that's keeping our whole model of so-called free market democracy running is the fact that we have those Western values that we talked. So you got intellectual property, privacy, liberty.
Yeah, and you can't erase them. They've tried. Look at how much they've gone after the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, but they have never succeeded getting rid of it. And boy, do they want to get rid of it. If you're someone who is terrified of the masses coming from you, the idea of them being armed too makes it all the worse. So they really, 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 really want to get rid of guns in America for that reason, but they haven't been able to.
The things like that. Those are sort of the cornerstones of our system. They want to remove all that and get the same level of command and control China has, but we don't have an equivalent system that's actually effectively administrating our country. It's looting the country.
And from what I've heard, China isn't actually that bad in terms of the level of control. And I actually think that in the current world where you have a Western media that exists to propagandize and deceive the public, democracy in some ways is a weakness because it allows a foreign power, the United States, to rig your elections through the media. Because they could prop up candidates that want to betray their countries and sell out the United States. And that's what it does around the world, the United States. You can't do that in China if there's no elections. But also, you can't say that the people in China are oppressed because China's growing, has been growing and growing economically for decades. And that's what the people want. If it ever stops growing, then there might be pressure for democracy. But if it's not broken, why fix it? As long as China's doing well, why is democracy necessary?
Country. So you put those two pieces together. I can't say, well, China's got like surveillance architecture. They're muddling by, I guess. It's not the same. Our surveillance architecture is going to be used to just loot the system faster, unless I'm missing something, because that's all I've seen so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I'm saving all the economic headlines to go through them with you, and it's just one was worse after the other. Price increase since the start of the Iran war. Actually, show that image. This is going to show how messed up things are. There you go. I'll send it to you, Paul. Wheat is up. I don't know if these figures are accurate, but wheat is up 14% since the Iran war. It's up to 17th of August, 3 days ago. Palm oil is up to 17%. Brent crude oil 25% up.
Yeah, wheat only up 14%. That's going to soar. But next year, starting next year.
Which doesn't make sense. The number is just way too low. And we've talked about the manipulation of the markets in the last few episodes. Diammonium phosphate, 27%. WTI, 27%. Cotton is up 31%. Gasoline, so it's
look at that down here. European natural gas, up 95%. I've said it before. Europe is screwed this winter. Screwed. They lost Russia because they did that to themselves. And now they lost Qatar, the other huge source of LNG. Then they haven't been replenishing their reserves for this winter. Some people are going to freeze.
Refined, up 36%. Rice, 36%. That's the food crisis.
And people who don't freeze are going to be paying through their nose for heating this winter in Europe.
Diesel, 45%. Jet fuel, 56% up. Heating oil, up 71%. European natural gas, you add European to it, it's up above everything else. Doubled in price, 95%. Fucking Europe is so screwed. And I love it.
Yeah, I've said it. Yeah, and you have the bastard, the globalists in Europe. All they're thinking about is how to send more drones into Russia. They're not thinking about the fact that their populations are going to freeze during the winter. That should be their number one concern, is how do we prevent our people from dying? That should be the number one concern of European leaders right now. Instead, they're worried about sending drones into Russia and sending money to Ukraine. Money that could be used to buy natural gas. If the money, if that loan, $90 billion loan to Ukraine, if that had been rerouted to buy natural gas, then they'd actually be okay for the winter. But they didn't do that.
I have no idea how much I love Europe. Anyone that's been to Europe, you'll understand why it's incredible. And sulfur, 145%. So that's one. I'll save that headline for
That's right. A lot of pent-up inflation that's going to be working its way through the system.
my discussion with Chris. There's the one about bond yields up around the world. You say they're calling it global bond markets having caught on fire. The U.S. interest expense on the national debt hit a record of one. That's yesterday.
230 units that are vacant, and you can immediately see it with your eyes. It's like
Yeah, it looks like an interesting video. We can have a look at it afterwards. I'm going to have to start using Discord more for posting links like that. I don't, have to click off the video every time. We might try doing that eventually. Let's not worrying about it now, though.
Record of $1.4 trillion over the last 12 months. Since 2020, the cost of servicing U.S. public debt has nearly tripled since 2020, the last 6 years, 5 years.
Well, I fixed that suggestion channel. You can post in it now, Proton Snail.
What are we, 2025 now? I think 5 years. If rates remain stable, interest payments are set to rise to $1.7 trillion by November 2028. Jesus Christ. And that's a big if rates remain stable. Let me show you the graph just for the audience. Let me send it to you now, Paul. There it is. As a result, interest will surpass Social Security spending as the government's largest outlay for the first time.
Yeah, unsustainable. Absolutely unsustainable. Even if you don't look at the conspiracy angle and like all the shenanigans going on behind the scenes, just look at the face value of everything. It's still unsustainable. The United States and, by extension, the dollar are screwed.
Jesus Christ.
Look at that. Takes a little kink there.
This is
a little bend.
It goes back to your example of exponential growth and the drop of water, I think you said, to fill a stadium.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a little bumpy, but that's
this right here. This right, you see, it was sort of started going up. It should have gone up like this, but there was a shale boom, the fracking. Fracking delayed everything, I think, by 10 years. Delayed the fall of the dollar by 10 years. It was huge impact on the economic picture.
That's very much an exponential sort of a chart, and it's going to start growing faster and faster and faster, and that's how it's going to go.
Well, there's one more I want to read, and I'll put it all in context. That's one I've been waiting for. Gold, show this one, please, Paul. Gold has overtaken U.S. Treasuries as the world's top reserve asset. I think that happened a while ago, but I don't know why the news caught up to it yesterday. As countries and private investors resume their accumulation of gold assets, that's a graph there. Just to be clear, that's overtaking U.S. Treasuries, not U.S. dollar-denominated assets, just the Treasuries. So if you break that, if you put all the dollar-denominated assets, it's still above gold. But if you break them down to Treasuries, corporate bonds, etc., U.S. dollars.
At the current levels, I still think it's a good time to get into gold. I think that went up to 550, and then it retraced here, and I think it's getting ready to do its next leg up.
Gold is the biggest, which is still very significant. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of throw all these numbers at you, Chris, to get your thoughts. There's still a lot there.
Well, it is, and I'll throw one more at you. So right now, debt in the U.S., total debt. This includes the $40 trillion from the U.S. government, but also corporate and household debt. So all the debt, state debt, municipal debt, all the debt, not unfunded IOUs, Social Security or Medicare, just the debt. Right now, it stands at about 116 trillion. And I would just point out that
that's a lot.
Right before COVID struck in 2020, the number was 85 trillion. So that's little over 6 years ago. So in 6 years, we've increased our total debt by $30 trillion. But I would point out that it took, again, all of the United States history to accumulate its first 30 trillion by the year 2005. So all of history. Every road built, every school, every factory, every piece of commerce, everything done, the entire real estate market, both corporate and residential, 30 trillion. What did we spend that 30 trillion on over the last 6 years? Well, about half of that was actually government debt, and a lot of that went to nobody knows what, presumably Somali daycare centers and
Somali daycare centers, yes,
blowing things up. That's all I can really point at for sure. At this stage, we don't have high-speed trains. It's embarrassing when you land at JFK and go through all the potholes.
U.S. infrastructure has been stagnant for the last 30 years almost. No new highways, no new big bridges, no new sophisticated train systems. Look at the one sophisticated train system proposed in California, the high-speed rail. Has just poured tons of money into that, and it's not going nowhere. It's not going to be ready within our lifetime. Yeah. Yeah, we're just slow decay that's going to transition into fast decay.
See the ruined, infrastructures. We're not investing in our country. But even the other half of that, which would be
We can't invest in our country because we have this mountain of debt that the Treasury keeps issuing every month. And every bit of spare cash needs to be funneled into treasuries. There's no spare money to invest in the United States. No, all of it needs to go and fuel the treasury market.
about 15 trillion went into the so-called private space. And to put it in perspective, that's a little bit larger than the entirety of the entire U.S. mortgage market. So every residential house doesn't even equal whatever we borrowed that other 15 trillion for. So I don't. It's astonishing. Well, if this goes again, it's that stadium example, because it's going faster and faster and faster. We will find that in the next few years, we might have to borrow 30 trillion every 2 years. And a little bit later, it'll be at 30 trillion in a year. And then it'll be 30 trillion every 6 months, right? And at that point, prices of things are going to be inflating faster and faster and faster. So to anybody listening to this, you already know this, right? You already know things are going faster. You already, like if you go out and get a restaurant
Yeah, food, everything costs more.
bill or look at your grocery bill or look at what's happening to your electricity prices, you can feel everything's beginning to mount. It's going faster and faster. Now, I said we have a faith-based money system, and this is the truth.
Yeah, this is the key. Inflation expectation is what the Fed calls it. And it's a real thing.
Trick. Half of that is literally the psychology of it. And so they've done all these studies, and there's no magic line, but somewhere around 8 to 10%, they think, when inflation finally gets to 8 or 10%, that's when it sort of breaks the psychology of everybody. And everybody goes,
People start acting differently.
I better spend it today because it's going to be worth less tomorrow. And the faster everybody spends it today, in case it's worth
The velocity of money through the economy. This is what that finally, like how fast does money move from person A to person B to person C? Well, if people have low inflation expectation, then the flow of money is pretty slow. But like you said, when it hits 8 to 10%, it starts accelerating. That thing that you've been thinking about, I've been thinking about buying a new car, but I could wait till next year. That changes. I need to buy a new car, but next year it's going to be so much more expensive, and I've got money in the bank right now. I could buy a new car right now. I should do that because next year it's probably going to go up in price, and I won't be able to afford it. And so all these purchases that would have been delayed normally start being done sooner. And that creates a lot more demand for goods, which drives up prices even more and becomes a spiral. At the extreme, once the 8 to 10% inflation, that changes views a little bit. But when you start getting 20%, 30% inflation, it changes again. In Zimbabwe, when they had horrible higher inflation, you had the extreme of this mentality that results from high inflation. And it's like, never go to bed at night with cash. That means before you go to bed, you take your cash and you go buy something, anything. You make sure you never have cash in your hand when you go to bed, because if you go to bed with cash, that cash will be worth less in the morning. So you have to spend it the night before. When you reach that mentality, money is zooming through the economy at lightning speed, and prices are soaring so fast that they change daily. It's the extreme of hyperinflation, and we won't be reaching that stage for a few years, but we will be reaching it eventually here in the United States. Fed is going to lose control of inflation expectations. And Iran war and all those prices increase we just looked at is a big part of it.
less tomorrow, the faster prices go up today, and and it just goes and it feeds on itself. And then that's why the Chinese, when they were the first, they first invented paper money, I don't know, 1,000 years ago or more. And the name for it literally translates into paper money translates into flying money.
Yes, flying money.
So the idea is that it just sort of flies,
Just flies around.
It just
Woo,
catches
woo,
wind
woo,
and off
faster
it
and
goes.
faster.
It's just and so that's what we're afraid of here, is to get to flying money. Hasn't happened to a reserve currency in a long time, and I know George Gammon.
No, it didn't happen to the pound sterling when the British Empire lost its reserves currency. But no, I'm just going to say it now. What's going to happen when the dollar collapses is unlike anything in human history. There has never been a debt bubble the size of the U.S. financial system. And the ramifications are going to be monumental. In terms of who's going to suffer the least, the countries that are sanctioned, that are most cut off from the United States, are the ones that are going to do the best. So China and Russia, China, and Iran, the BRICS country, are the ones that are going to weather this the best.
Big fan of saying, hey, not, cleanest dirty shirt at the laundry. The dollar isn't perfect, but it's the only game in town. Philip Pilkington potentially taking, a little bit of a there are options out there, and countries are increasingly taking advantage of those different options, including the gold thing you just saw. So that's what I see in that gold chart, is losing faith in a system that desperately can't have any faith lost in it.
I agree. And I love the how you started the conversation talking about exponentiality, which I think is what really matters. It reminded me of a quote. I was just Googling it to remember what it says exactly. Ernest Hemingway's quote, how did you go bankrupt? 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. And
yeah, that quote applies to wars too. How do you lose a war? Gradually, then quickly. That's how most things happen.
I feel like this is what we're experiencing now. Gradually and then suddenly. And I feel like we're going through the suddenly as we speak.
Yep.
And that suddenly is going to happen because it's just part of the exponential curve. When you're on an exponential function, things just go really, really fast at the end. That's the takeaway message from that. It's not how many minutes it takes or any of that. It's really that just speeds up. It really speeds up at the end. So, but we have multiple of these exponential curves kind of sort of bearing down on this little moment of history. And it's going to be some of them, a guy, John Michael Greer, he put this definition out a while ago, which I loved. And he said, there's a difference between problems and predicaments. Problems, he says, have solutions.
This is great.
Right? So you can find a way, and sometimes you can even solve a problem in a way that you come out better than you entered the problem with. But predicaments just have outcomes.
Yeah, like Ponzi schemes, like Madoff Ponzi scheme. You find out that this guy, Bernie Madoff, for decades has been taking investor money in and paying other investors with the money he's taken in from new investors. That's what he did, a Ponzi scheme. And so he didn't have any money. Eventually, in 2008, he ran out because of a financial crisis. And everyone that had money invested with Madoff had nothing. If you find out whether that's about to happen, like a year ahead of time that Madoff's running Ponzi scheme, you can't fix it. He owes so much money and he has nothing. It's a predicament. It's something that cannot be fixed. It just has an outcome, which is everyone invested with him loses everything.
And that means you have to manage them as well as you can, right? So Japan...
That's the problem. The people at the top, the people that are still running our system, that control the media, still trying desperately to prop up the ailing dollar, and they're going to try to prop it up until the end because they never want to be held accountable for their actions, and that means it's impossible to prepare for it on governmental level.
And has a population that's now aging and in decline, and they're treating it like a problem. Oh, we'll just print more money, and the Bank of Japan's trying to get more debt in the economy, as if it's a problem to be solved by just goosing the economy harder with more debt. And it's not. It's a predicament. You have fewer people this year than last year, and they're older, and they're just not buying as much. And so if you understand that, then you say, oh, well, we should manage this as intelligently as possible. Maybe we should manage our money system so it serves the people of our country rather than trying to figure out how to horsewhip our people into making sure our system of money is happily expanding.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That's entirely what the system, the media, the elites are trying to do, is to just sacrifice their own people in every way possible just to keep the system going.
Exponentially. So that's kind of the difference there.
Yeah, well said. No, I feel like I was just thinking of it a couple of minutes ago. Our discussions go the fastest for me. I can't believe it's already up. We're at the hour. Really enjoyed it. Appreciate. When's your series coming out?
This was an excellent video. Covered a lot of topics and talk about what's coming, what's happening. Ton of inflation in the pipeline. That inflation is going to set off in motion a financial crisis next year, which is going to lead to an inflation debt spiral that'll eventually destroy the dollar. It'll take a few years to play out, but yeah, we're reaching the end stages for the U.S. financial system, the U.S. hegemony over the world. And it's going to be a rough ride. This will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch. And I'll see you next video. Bye.